Hi, I'm Abdul and welcome to this tutorial from Vonage. This video will cover how to receive an incoming phone call in an iOS application using the Vonage Client SDK for iOS in Swift. When you make a call to a number linked to your application, Vonage makes a HTTP call to a URL that has the information needed to handle the call. This is called the answer URL. You will use Express and Node.js to set up your answer URL. To follow along with this video, you will need a Vonage account, Node.js and Xcode installed, as well as the Vonage CLI with the Users and Conversations plugin. When an inbound call is received, Vonage makes a request to a publicly accessible URL of your choice. We call this the answer URL. You need to create a webhook server that is capable of receiving this request and returning an NCCO. An NCCO is a JSON array that you use to control the flow of a call. Create a new project directory and change into it. Inside this directory, initialize a new Node.js project by running npm init-y. Next, install the node dependencies needed using npm install express local tunnel --save. Create a new file called server.js and open it in your code editor. Start off by defining some constants for use later and setting up Express. Next, define the root of the answer URL. This route will return an NCCO with a talk action followed by a connect action. The connect action will connect the inbound call to an app user called Alice. Define the route for event callbacks and log the incoming events to the console. Finally, set up local tunnel to allow your local server to be accessible to the internet. Be sure to replace the subdomain constant with a unique string. Return to the terminal to start the server by running node server.js. Now it's time to create a Vonage application. In your project folder, run the apps create command to create application. Name it and specify the event URL and voice answer URL from the webhook server you just created. As you can see, a private key has been generated for you and you have been given an application ID. Keep a note of these as you will need them later. Users are a key concept when working with the Vonage Client SDKs. When a user authenticates with a Client SDK, the credentials provided identify them as a specific user. Run Vonage apps users create Alice. This will create a user with the username Alice for your application. The Client SDK uses JWTs for authentication. The JWT identifies the username, the associated application ID, and the permissions granted to the user. It is signed using your private key to prove that it's a valid token. Run the JWT generate command, which you can also find in the link in the description. It uses the private key, username, and application ID from earlier, along with access control lists or ACLs, to generate a JWT for the specified user. For this project, you will need a Vonage number. You can view the numbers you own using the Vonage numbers command. If you want to buy a new number, you can search for one, then use the Vonage numbers buy command to buy it. Before we move on, use the apps link command to link the number from earlier to your new application. Now it's time to create the project. Open Xcode and create a new project. Select iOS for platform, then app for application type. Name your project, select Swift for a language and storyboard for the user interface. Now that your project is created, close it as you need to add the Client SDK library via CocoaPods. Open the terminal and change directory into your project folder and run pod init. This creates a pod file. Open the pod file and add Nexmo client as a dependency. Once done, run pod install. That will download the Nexmo client and add it to your project. Now open the XC workspace. As you will be using the microphone when making a call, you need to request permission to use it. To do so, open the info.ps file, which is a file that contains the metadata for your project, and add a new entry. From the drop-down list, pick privacy microphone user's description and add a description for its value. Next, open the app.delegate file and import AV Foundation. In the did finish launching with options function, request permissions by making a call to AV audio session. Also print out whether it's been granted or not to the terminal to help us debug if needed. If you build and run the project, you will now be asked to grant permission to the microphone. For the core user interface, you will need a label to show the connection status of the app and the Vonage servers. Set the default text to unknown, add it to the subview, then constrain it. Before you can receive a call, the Client SDK needs to authenticate to the Vonage servers. Import Nexmo client in the view controller file and create a local instance for the client. Now you can log in using the JWT you created earlier. Also set the delegate of the client to this class too. The delegate provides updates and changes that happen with calls, so you'll want to listen out for them. Create an extension for the NXM client delegate and implement the didChangeStatus function, which will update the status label depending on the client's connection to the Vonage servers. Another required function on the delegate is the didReceiveError function. This will also update the status label if there's an error. There is no guarantee that the delegate functions will be called on the main thread, but since they are changing the UI, you will call dispatch_queue_main async to ensure the changes are done on the main thread. If you build and run again, the status label updates are connected. Next, you will prepare to receive an incoming call. First, declare a property in the class to hold reference to the call object. When the application receives a call, we want to give the option to accept or reject the call. To do this, add the display incoming call alert function to the view controller class. This function will show an alert when it's called with an NXM call object. The NXM call object allows you to use the members of the call to retrieve the phone number of the incoming call. Note, in the UI alert action for answering, we assign the call object to the property from earlier. To use the display incoming call alert function, you need to implement the delegate function that is called when the client receives an incoming call. Build and run again. When you call the number linked to your application from earlier, you'll be presented with an alert. You can view the events from the call in your terminal window that is running the webhook server. If you have any questions, please leave a comment or email devrel@vonage.com. To learn more about what you can do with the Vonage Client SDK for iOS, visit developer.nexmo.com/client-SDK.